friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lora Rolling and this is the fourth and final part of the Snow Flurry ornament tutorial. This is the Snow Flurry ornament that we have been making. We've already done part 1, making this triangle, part 2, making this one, and part 3, making this one. If you have missed those first 3 parts, that's okay. I have them linked down below. Go ahead and do those first and then come back to this one and we'll finish it up. Today we're going to combine all of our units together, make the cap, and also add the ribbon. We just have a few materials to get ready, so let's go. I am so excited. We are finally going to use all 20 of the units that we have been making in the prior 3 videos. So we have 10 of the big snowflake, 5 of the small snow, and 5 of the top tier. We also are going to use the beads that we've been using all along. They are the Miyuki Delica in opaque delphinium, chalk white, and silver lined crystal. I'm going to call this blue, white, and silver, and we're going to use these when we get to making the cap. We are also going to need a 2.36 inch plastic crafting ornament. You can find these at your local hobby store. They usually come in a 12-pack. You just need one. We're going to use the Essilon Fire thread or your fire line in crystal. I use the 4-pound. You can also use 6-pound or any beading thread that you love, as long as it's not too thick. I wouldn't go beyond 6-pound thread. I also use the size 10 beading needle. You can use a size 12 if you'd like. And of course, we're going to finish off the ornament hanging it on a ribbon. This is 12 inches of 1/2 width ribbon, and you can just pick any ribbon of your choice, whatever you think looks good with your ornament. Alrighty, let's thread our needle with about 5 to 5.5 feet of thread, and then we can get started. Okay, so let's look at the first unit that we're going to work on. We are going to have our connector beads sticking out on the right hand side. We're not going to have any connector beads on the left and no connector beads on the bottom. Okay, we're going to start sewing our thread through. We're just going to pick a random bead kind of towards the top on the left hand side, and we're going to sew through until we have about 1 inch of tail left. Then we're going to sew down the next bead, locking it in, and then sew up the bead next to that. What we're doing is we're going to try to save our thread. I don't like to waste any thread, and this is how I get away with using every single bit. Now that it's fairly tight in there, but not completely locked in, I'm going to pull my thread until my tail kind of gets hidden right there. Now, I don't want to pull too hard, but so I'm coming out of this one. I'm going to sew down this next one. I'm going to just pull hard enough to make it hide, and then I'm going to sew up the next one, locking in my thread, and now it really is locked in enough. We haven't wasted any thread. Now I'm just going to sew up my beads until I get through this top bead. Now my needle is coming out facing our connecting beads. I'll meet you there. Okay, now that our thread is coming out of that top bead, we're going to sew down the next 2 beads, getting our thread in position to connect to the next unit. So our thread is now coming out of this first sticky outie, and now we're ready to take a look at our second unit. Our second unit has no connector beads on this side, no connector beads on this side, and we do have connector beads on this side. So the connecting beads you want to be on the right side. Okay, so you always want your connector beads to be on the right side with these first 5 big snowflakes. So knowing that it's now on the right side, we're going to connect this way. We are coming out of our first sticky up bead. We're going to then sew through the second sticky up bead on the second big snowflake unit. So just like this. And then we're going to just zigzag. We're going to sew through the second sticky out bead on our first snowflake. And then we're going to sew through the next sticky outie on the second snowflake. And then the next one on the first. And we're going to do that until we've gone all the way down. Once we get a couple of zigzags, just make sure that your thread is not crisscrossed in any way, and then you can just pull and they'll kind of pull together. And then you can continue to zigzag all the way down until you've reached this bottom corner bead. And I'm going to do that off camera, and so you can pause the video right now, and then when you're finished and your needle is coming out of this one, then press play again and I'll meet you right here. Okay, so I am now coming out of my corner bead on the second unit, and I pull it nice and tight so they are completely zipped up and connected. Now I'm going to sew through the first 2 beads coming out of that first sticky outie bead. Now we are in position to add our third big snowflake. So grab another big snowflake and make sure that the connector beads are on the right side. We're going to connect the left side that has no connector beads to the second unit. This time we're going to zip it upwards. So we're coming out of this first sticky outie. We're going to sew through this second sticky outie on our on our third big snowflake. Okay, then of course we're going to grab the next one and we're going to zigzag just like we did in the last one with the last connection, and just making sure that our threads are not crisscrossed in any way. Zip it up. So zigzag all the way up and meet me right here. Okay, so now we are coming out of this top corner bead. We want to sew down 1 bead, getting our thread in position to sew on another unit. So this time we're going to grab our small snow unit, the first small snow unit, and you'll notice that we have connector beads on the left. No connector beads on the left. We have connector beads on the right and connector beads on the bottom. So that's how we want to position it onto the top of our big snowflake. Okay, now we're coming out of this first sticky outie, we're going to sew down this first sticky outie on the newest unit. Okay, and just like before, we're just going to zigzag back and forth until they're completely connected. And then we are going to end up in this corner bead, and I will meet you there. Okay, now we are coming out of this corner bead of the third big snowflake. We're going to sew down the next two beads, getting our thread in position to attach the fourth big snowflake. Okay, so making sure that the connector beads are on the right, we're going to catch the second sticky outie and then the second on the big unit, and then the third sticky outie, and the third on the big unit. Zigzag your way all the way down until you've reached this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so we are now coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew up the next two beads, and we're going to attach our fifth big snowflake, making sure that our connector beads, the side that has our connector beads, is on the right. Okay, so this time we're sewing up, so we're going to catch that second sticky outie bead, and then sew through the second sticky outie on the big unit, and then the third sticky outie, and back and forth until you reach this corner bead, and I will meet you there. Okay, so we are coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the one bead that's right under it, and we're going to now attach another small snow unit, remembering that we need connector beads on the right hand side and on the bottom. We're connecting the bottom, and there are no connector beads on the left hand side. Okay, so we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew down the first sticky outie bead, sew down the next bead, making sure that our thread is not twisted at all. I'm getting out of shot. There we go. Sew down the next, zigzag all the way down, and I will meet you right here. So now we are coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next two beads, and we now get to connect our first big snowflake to our fifth big snowflake. So we're going to sew down the second sticky outie, and then again, and zigzag our way all the way down until we come out of this bead. I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this silver bead. We're going to connect all 5 of these silver beads in a circle. So sew through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's do that one more time. We're going to sew through 4 this time. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to sew all the way back up by starting with this first bead right here, and we're going to just zigzag up. You can choose any beads that you want. It really doesn't matter as long as you hide your thread as you're sewing up these beads and you end in this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this bead. We're going to sew down the bead right next to it, and we are now in position to add our third small snow unit, making sure that the connector beads are on the right, there we go, the right and the bottom. There's no connector beads on the left. And so we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew through the first sticky outie, and then the second sticky outie on the big unit, and zigzag your way down, making sure that your thread is not crisscrossing at all. And I'll meet you down until you get to this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this silver bead. We're going to sew up the next 2 beads, getting in position to add our next unit. Our next unit is a big snowflake unit. So we're going to make sure that we have no connector beads on the left, no connector beads on the top, and we do have connector beads on the right. So we're going to connect it like this, sewing through the second sticky outie, and the next one, and the next, and we're going to zip it on up until we get to this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this top corner bead. We're going to sew through the next bead, and now we are in position to add our first top tier unit. Now our top tier unit has the connector beads on the bottom, and it also has connector beads on the right. So there's no connector beads on the left. We're going to attach this by sewing through the first sticky outie and zigzag as usual. We're going to zigzag all the way down, just like that, until, get it tight, until we come through this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next 2 we are in position to put on our next small snow unit. Now you'll notice that on the small snow unit we need to connect on the left side because the right side has connector beads and the bottom has connector beads. Okay, so the left side has no connector beads. So we're going to sew through the second sticky outie and zigzag just like we have been all the way down. And I will meet you when we get to this corner bead. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew around all 5 of the corner beads, connecting them into a circle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to go through it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then we're going to sew through 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to sew up the first bead right next to the silver bead, and then we're going to sew up the next sticky outie and zigzag our way all the way up until we get to this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so we are coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew up the next 2 beads, and now we're ready to put another big snowflake on. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have our, looking at it this way, there are no connector beads on the left, there are connector beads on the right, and there are no connector beads on the top. So connecting it this way so that the connector beads are on the right here. So we're going to catch the second sticky outie bead, and the second on the big unit, making sure that we're zigzagging without crossing our threads. Just like that. Pull it tight, and I will meet you up at the top of the big snowflake right there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this silver bead. We're going to sew down the next blue bead, and we are now ready to add a top tier unit. Remember that the connector beads are on the right hand side and on the bottom, but not on the left hand side. So we're going to connect it like this we're going to sew through the first sticky outie, and then the next, and then the next, and sew it on up until, zip it on up until you reach this bead, and I'll meet you there. So we are now coming out of this bead. We're going to sew down the next 2 blue beads, and now we can connect this unit to this unit. So it's already there for us. We're going to sew down the second sticky outie and zip it on down back and forth until we get to, let me go through one more. Zip it on up until we get to this corner bead. I'll meet you there. Okay, so we are now coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew in a circle all 5 beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we're going to sew through 4 beads. 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to pull it tight so that that little circle really hugs itself. And now we're going to sew up this next blue bead and the next blue bead. We're going to zip up, try to pull tight so that circle gets real close together. Now we're going to sew up. You can pick any beads that you want as long as you're hiding your thread, and then we are going to end in this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this top bead. We're going to sew through the next 2 blue beads. 1 and 2, getting our thread in position to add the next big snowflake. Okay, so the snowflake is going to have connector beads on the right, no connector beads on the left, and no connector beads on the top. Okay, so we're sewing the left hand side. That second sticking out bead is the first one that we go through, and zigzag your way all the way down until you get to this bead, and I will meet you there. So now we are coming out of this bead. We're going to sew up the next 2 beads, and now we are ready to add our 5th small snow unit. And we don't have any connector beads on the left. We do have connector beads on the bottom, and we do have connector beads on the right. So we're going to connect the left by sewing up the second sticky outie, and doing our zigzag all the way up until we get to this top corner bead, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this top bead. We're going to sew down the next 2 blue beads, 1 and 2, and now we're ready to put on our 9th big snowflake. So we don't have connector beads on the top. We don't have connector beads on the left, but we do have connector beads on the right. So we're going to sew through the second sticky outie, and I feel like I'm all thumbs all of a sudden. And we're going to zip it on up. Just like that. And then we're going to zigzag all the way down until we get to this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next 2. And we get to attach the one that's already in place by sewing down the second bead, second sticky outie, zip it on up until you have, or zigzag all the way down until you have reached this silver bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew these in a circle, tighten them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to sew through 1 more, pull tight, and then we're going to sew up all the blue beads until you reach, zigzag all the way up, until you reach, well, I would say this bead, and then this bead, and ending in the corner bead. And I will meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down 1 blue, and now we are in position to add another top tier unit. So remembering that we have connector beads on the right and on the bottom, but not on the left. We're going to attach our top tier by sewing through the first sticky outie, and the next, and the next, zipping it on up until you reach this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. So we're now coming out of this silver bead. We're going to sew up the next 2 beads. One is blue, and then the white one, that first sticky outie. And now we are ready to add another top tier unit, making sure that the connector beads are on the right and the bottom. We're going to connect the left. We're going to sew through the second sticky outie, and zip it on up until you reach this connector bead, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this connector bead. We're going to sew down the next two beads right next to it, and then we're going to sew down all the way down, hiding our thread until we get to this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're in position to connect all 5 of the corner beads. So let's sew through all 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then sew through 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. Pull it tight, and now we're going to sew up this blue bead and then up the next sticky outie, connecting these two by zigzagging all the way up until we reach this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew down the next 2 blue beads, and we get to connect what's already there, our small snow unit, by sewing through the second sticky outie, and then the second, and then the third, and zigzagging all the way down until you reach this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. So now we get to sew these 5 beads in a circle. We are going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to sew up this blue bead, tighten the circle, up this next blue bead, and then sew up, hiding your thread until you reach this corner bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, now we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next 2, and we are now in position to add our final big snowflake. So remembering that The connector beads are on the right, and there's no connector beads on the left, and there's none on the top. We're going to connect the left, and we're going to sew down the second sticky outy bead, and zigzag your way all the way to this connector bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew in the circle. This time we're going to go the opposite direction, sewing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to sew up the first 2 blue beads, but don't go any further because we now get to place our ornament inside the units. And you'll see that if you fold them up, it fits perfectly. Now we get to sew zip on up this side, and it will tighten onto the ornament as we do so. So you're coming out of this second bead, sew up the right side, then the left, then the right, all the way up until you get to this bead, and I'll meet you there. So we're coming out of this silver bead. We're going to sew through the next blue bead, and now we get to add our final top tier unit, making sure that the connector beads are on the right. We're going to sew through the first pokey outie and zigzag your way through. All the way until you get to this corner bead, and I will meet you there. Okay, now we can sew these silver beads into a circle. So sew through the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then again 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pull it tight, and then sew up this blue bead and this white bead, and then zip it all the way up until you reach this bead up at the top, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this bead, and we want to zip up this little space right here. So we want to sew down 2 beads and pull it tight. And now we want to work our way over to this bead right here. So this is how we do it. We need to follow the thread line, all while hiding the thread. So we go up a bead, down a bead, up a bead, and now we can cross over because it follows the thread line. Down a bead. And you'll see that this is very movable. I would suggest pulling out the cap and setting it aside so that it really is a lot easier to get your needle around. So we are now coming out of this bead, coming down. We're going to sew up the bead next to it and down, up the bead next to that one, and now we can sew up the connector bead. We can connect this one by going down and down the second one as well. And now we're going to zip it up by going down the second one, pull it nice and tight, and we're going to zip it on down, back and forth, zigzagging all the way down until we end up in this bead, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to close the circle by sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to sew through 3. 1, 2, and 3. It's nice and tight, so we're going to sew up the next blue bead and then up the bead right next to that. And we're going to zigzag through until we reach this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to close up this circle by sewing through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're coming out of this bead right here. We're going to sew up through the blue bead and the white bead right above it. We're going to connect these 2 units by zigzagging back and forth to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, until we get up to this bead right here, and I will meet you there. So now we're coming out of this bead right here, and we just have to fill in that gap. So we're going to sew down the next 2 beads, connecting that. And now we're going to work our way over to this connection line. So we're going to sew up the next bead, sew down the bead next to that one, sew up the next bead. Following our thread line, we're sewing down the next bead, just one. There we go. Sew up the next bead, down, the next bead, and then we're going to sew up the silver bead and up that first connection bead. So now we're in position to start sewing, connecting these 2 units. And so we're going to sew down these 2 beads, and then we're going to sew the second sticky outie on the left, the second sticky outie on the right, the third sticky outie on the left, and pull tight, and that connects it all together nice and tight. And now we're going to zigzag all the way down, and so we can sew this last circle of 5. So I will meet you right here. Okay, so rounding our last 5 round beads, let's sew through the next, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go through it one more time. 1, 2, 3. Just about to lose my thread. Getting down to the nitty-gritty. 4 and 5. Now pull tight, and we're going to weave through and end our thread. So following the thread line, we're coming out of this bead right here. We're going to sew through the blue bead, sew through the next blue and the next blue, and now I'm going to go up the one right next to the one that I'm coming out of, down the one right next to that, down the one right next to that one, or right below that one, up the next one, and down the next 2. Then I'm going to cut my thread. You might, before you cut your thread, you might want to just go around, make sure that you didn't miss tightening any of the 5 rounds. There's 5 rounds on the top. There's also 5 rounds on the lower, and then there's one at the very bottom. So just make sure that they're all tightened up before you end your thread. And so I'm just going to grab my thread and cut it right there. Now we are done, completed doing our units, connecting all of our units, which is awesome. Our bulb looks so beautiful, our cute little snow flurry ornament. I'm going to put the cap back on, and it fits like a glove right on in there. And the next thing we're going to do is bead the cap. So go ahead and pour out your white blue, and silver beads and thread your needle with 2 feet of thread, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I have my thread on my needle, and I've also picked up 40 white beads. So I'm going to leave about a 6-inch tail, and I'm going to tie a knot. So cross over and pull through, and then cross over again and pull through, and then cinch up your knot, making sure that you do not catch one of the beads, which is so easy to do. It's trying to do it right now. So I'm going to push that bead down, and I'm tying my knot. I caught it perfectly. I've got my tail in my hand. I'm going to sew through. I'm going to sew through 4 beads, and now I'm in position to start picking up 20 more beads one at a time. So I'm going to pick up 1 white, and I'm coming out of this one. I'm going to skip this bead, and I'm going to sew through the next. So there we go, right there. And pull it as tight as I can, and it kind of sits right next to its friend right there. Now I'm going to pick up another bead. Coming out of this bead, I'm going to skip this one and sew through the next. So this is what you have. I'm going to keep on doing that until I've gone all the way around, skip this bead, sew through the next, and I'm going to have put 20 more beads on, and I will meet you when I'm putting on the 20th bead. So I have now picked up my 20th bead. I'm coming out of this bead, and I'm going to skip this one, sew up the next, and I'm going to sew through the second bead. So we're stepping up. And so this is what you should have now. And now we're going to fit this on the top of our cap. So it's going to be very snug, but that's okay. Just kind of force it until it goes down. Then we're going to take our tail thread and our long thread and pull tight to where it's nice and snug. Now, right now I am coming out of a bottom bead. My thread is coming out of a bottom bead. If yours is coming out of a top bead right now, you don't have to do a thing. But if yours is like mine and you're coming out of a bottom bead, then you'll want to sew up 2 beads, making it so that your thread is coming out of a top bead. So I'm just going to sew up those 2 beads. Now my thread is coming out of a top bead, and we are now ready to put on our silver beads. So we're going to add 20 silver beads, one at a time, just like we added the white ones, but this time we're going to keep it on the cap. So I'm coming out of this one. I'm going to skip the lower one and sew through the sticky outie, and then pick up another silver bead and sew through the next sticky outie. I'm going to do that all the way around until I've added 20 beads, and I will meet you at the 20th bead. Okay, so now I have my 20th bead on my needle, and I'm coming out of this one. I'm going to sew through that last white bead and also through the silver bead. So stepping up, if I can get it, there we go, stepping up And now we are in position to put a second row of silver on. I'm going to pull it tight again. You want them to be super snug. And just a tip, while you're sewing, you want to keep your finger on the top of the cap so that this does not slide off. It will slide off if you don't, hold it in place. That's okay. So I've picked up one silver bead. I'm going to sew through the next. One silver bead, sew through the next, and continue to do that until you've got 20 silver beads on, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now I have my last silver bead, which is number 20. I'm going to sew through the 2 silvers, and now I have stepped up and I am ready to put on my blue beads. So I'm going to pick up my first blue bead, and just like we did the other rows, we're going to do this 20 times. Sew through the next. One blue, sew through the next. We're going to go all the way around until we've put 20 blue beads on. And I will see you at the 20th. Okay, now I have my 20th blue bead, and I'm going to sew up the silver and the blue, just like that, stepping up to my next row. Now in the pattern, there's actually an option to do this 6th row. I'm going to do it only because you can still kind of see the ridges on this cap. It's just a little wonky, so I'm going to try to hide that. Okay, so I'm going to add 20 more beads, adding our 6th row. So picking up one blue bead and sewing through. And I'm going to go all the way around again, one bead at a time, until I have added 20 more beads, and I will see you there. Okay, so now I have my 20th blue bead on. I'm going to sew through the next 2, and now this is what our cap looks like. So cute. It's got a little bit of a picot up at the top. I love it. It looks very royal. So cute. Now all we have to do is sew back. We're coming out of this thread. We're going to sew back and then forward and zigzag just a couple of times so that we can cut off our thread. Actually, I'm going to go forward now, up probably 2, and then back and zigzag, going forward again through 3. And now I feel like it is weaved through enough to cut off this thread. So I'm just going to hold it and cut. And now we can thread our tail and do the same thing. Hiding it, of course, hiding that thread. We don't want to see any thread, not even on the cap. And ending with perfection. So we're coming out of this bead right here. We're going to sew forward once, and then we're going to turn around. So through the next bead and then zigzag through one blue. See, I'm keeping my thumb on the cap because it will come off if we try to take it off. But nobody's tugging on an ornament, so you don't have to worry about it. I know that One of my friends suggested gluing the cap on. You can do that if you want to, but it really is not a necessary thing to use glue on these ornaments at all, because literally once we have the ribbon on, nobody tugs at the ornament. nothing makes it want to come off, so it's fine just the way it is. Alrighty. Whoops. I dropped it. Okay, so now I feel like I've zigzagged up and down plenty of times. This time I'm going to use my long nose pliers and hold on tight and snip it. Now all we need to do is add the ribbon. So we're going to grab our ribbon and we're going to fold it in half, just like this. We're going to try to get these edges as uniform as possible. Then we're going to cross over and pull those edges through the loop, just like this. Try to get it as close to the top and as pretty as possible, just like that. And now we're going to hold the loop part, pinch it, and thread it through the ornament cap. Then open the loop and pull the knot through, and trying to make it as pretty as possible. And now you've got your ribbon attached and your ornament is complete, and it looks super cute and beautiful, and you did it. Congratulations, you now have a snow flurry ornament of your own. Congratulations on completing your snow flurry ornament. Isn't it just the cutest? I really enjoyed doing this tutorial with you. Thank you so much for beading along with me. Remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so you get notified when the next video comes out. I have a really cute one in store for you. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching.